It had been raining for hours that afternoon, the kind of soft, steady rain that turns the city gray and quiet. Inside the warm cafe on Fifth Avenue, Daniel Carter sat at the corner table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. He had checked his phone at least 10 times in the last half hour. The message thread with his blind date still ended at, "See you at 3." It was now 3:47. She wasn't coming. And for some reason, that small, ordinary disappointment felt heavier than it should have. Daniel wasn't new to loneliness. He had been living with it ever since his father's passing 2 years ago, and his mother's Alzheimer's diagnosis shortly after. His life revolved around work, visiting his mother in the nursing home, and trying not to drown in silence when he came home to an empty apartment every night. The blind date was supposed to be a small step toward changing that. He had even worn his favorite blazer, shaved carefully that morning, and tried to convince himself he still had something to offer someone. But as minutes stretched into almost an hour, reality sank in. She wasn't late. She wasn't coming. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and divine timing, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Stories. Your support helps us spread hope and real human connection. He sighed and stared out the rain-speckled window, watching people rush by under umbrellas. Couples laughed as they ran through puddles. Parents held their kids close, shielding them from the rain. He wondered when he'd stopped being part of that world, the world that still smiled in the rain. He took one last sip of his coffee, preparing to leave, when the cafe door opened and the small bell above it chimed softly. A woman stepped inside, brushing a few raindrops from her coat. She looked exhausted, maybe in her late 20s, her chestnut brown hair clinging slightly to her cheeks. In her arms was a little boy, maybe 3 or 4 years old, wearing a blue raincoat and clutching a brown paper bag like it was treasure. The child's cheeks were pink from the cold, and his small eyes looked around the cafe curiously. Daniel noticed them instantly, not because of beauty or drama, but because of the look in her eyes. It was a mix of fatigue, worry, and quiet courage. She glanced around as if searching for a seat. The cafe was busier now, with couples and students taking shelter from the rain. Every table was full. The only empty one was the one across from Daniel. Without thinking, he raised a hand slightly and said softly, "You can sit here if you'd like." She hesitated, clearly unsure, then gave a small, polite smile and came over. She thanked him quietly, settling her child on her lap. As she sat, Daniel could sense her discomfort, that careful awareness of someone used to being judged. Her coat looked neat but old, the kind that had been worn through more than one winter. The little boy opened the brown paper bag and took out a small sandwich, breaking it in half before offering a piece to his mother. She smiled faintly, then handed it back to him, insisting he eat. Daniel watched, feeling something tighten in his chest. He didn't want to stare, but there was something heartbreakingly tender about that moment. The way she put her child first, pretending not to be hungry while the rain kept tapping gently against the window. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but words felt heavy, intrusive. Still, something inside him, something deeper than politeness, pushed him to speak. He asked if they had been caught in the rain. She nodded. Her name was Emily, and her son's name was Noah. They had walked several blocks trying to reach a bus stop after the shelter they'd been staying in closed earlier than expected. She didn't go into much detail, but Daniel could tell. She was struggling. There was no ring on her hand, and her careful answers carried the weight of someone who'd had to explain too much to too many strangers already. When the waitress passed by, Daniel asked for 2 hot chocolates and a small sandwich. Emily tried to refuse, her pride flickering through her tired smile, but Daniel insisted gently. "Please," he said, "it's just lunch. No strings attached." The words seemed to soften something in her. She nodded, whispering a quiet "thank you." As Noah took his first sip of the hot chocolate, his little eyes lit up, and a tiny laugh escaped his lips. Pure and innocent. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped raining. Daniel found himself smiling, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. Over the next half hour, they talked. Not deeply at first, but about small things. About the weather, about how Noah loved dinosaurs, about how Emily used to work as a teacher before her husband's sudden passing left her struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke, not out of pity, but from the exhaustion of someone who had been holding everything together for far too long. Daniel listened. Really listened. For years, people had talked around him, not to him. But now, this simple conversation with a stranger and her little boy felt more human than anything he'd experienced in months. He realized something strange. He had come looking for romance, a spark, an escape from loneliness. But what he found sitting across from him was something much deeper. A glimpse of resilience. A quiet reminder that love wasn't always about candlelight dinners or fancy introductions. Sometimes, it was about being there when someone needed warmth the most. As the rain began to ease, Daniel offered to drive them to their next stop. Emily hesitated again, protective as any mother would be. But Noah, now smiling and holding his paper bag again, looked up and said, "Mommy, he's nice." That simple innocence broke whatever wall stood between them. She nodded. The drive was quiet at first. The city outside glowed pale under the post-rain light. Wet streets reflecting daylight in silver tones. Emily sat in the back seat, her hand resting gently on Noah's lap as he leaned against her. Daniel caught glimpses of them through the mirror, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. He dropped them near an old apartment complex. Emily thanked him again, her eyes soft but uncertain. She didn't ask for anything more, didn't promise to see him again. Just gratitude, pure and unspoken. But before she turned to leave, Noah looked back at Daniel and waved. "Thank you, mister," he said, smiling wide. "For the chocolate." Daniel smiled, watching them disappear through the glass door. He sat there for a long time after, the car still running, the rain starting again in soft drizzles. He thought about how strange life was. How sometimes, when you think you've been forgotten, fate sends you something unexpected. He had come to meet a woman who never showed up, but God had sent him someone else entirely. A reminder that love, in its purest form, isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's just compassion wrapped in coincidence. That night, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about them. He didn't even know where she lived exactly, but something inside him refused to let go. The next morning, he returned to the cafe, half hoping, half praying. And maybe prayers do find their way to the right doors, because a few minutes later, the door opened again. There she was. Same coat, same tired eyes, holding Noah's hand this time. When she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that was small, shy, but real. Noah tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, that's the nice man." And just like that, the loneliness that had clung to Daniel for so long began to melt. They talked again, this time longer. And over the weeks that followed, it became routine. Lunches at the cafe, small errands together. A growing bond that felt effortless and kind. He learned about her struggles, her courage, and her dreams. She learned about his quiet kindness, his patience, and his longing for family. Months later, the same corner cafe witnessed something different. Laughter. Noah sat between them, munching on fries while Emily and Daniel shared smiles over coffee. What had started as a missed date had turned into a miracle neither of them had been looking for. Daniel often thought back to that rainy afternoon. How disappointed he had been, how close he was to walking away. But if he had, he would have missed what was waiting right outside that cafe door. Because sometimes, when life says no, God whispers, "Not this. Something better." And on that rainy day, when the blind date never showed up, Daniel didn't meet a stranger. He met the beginning of a family. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Help us spread faith in humanity, hope, and the belief that miracles still happen in quiet corners of everyday life. Special request. Tell us in the comments. Do you believe some meetings are truly meant to be?